Apollo 13. Just Ron Howard and be proud. The movie, has some things I won't talk too much about. That obviously was Hollywood, but I did think it carried the theme, the bottom line story of that mission. We were people in trouble, big trouble. And you saw, I think the theme carried well the movie of a team that worked together, teamwork, that many of whom I talked to when I got back got less sleep on the ground than I got in flight, but managed to get us back. And so it's certainly Hollywood at least did a good job in that respect. I have to say preparation was tremendous for all the flights. In fact, an unusual thing, we did change out a crewman 2.5 days before launch. So we equally trained the prime and backup crew to be able to carry on if we had to with a whole new crew. We got ready to fly. And so when Gene Kranz, he was portrayed in the movie, and that's another thing, the movie that couldn't show all the people involved. I complained to Ron Howard, he just said, you can only develop so many characters in 2.5 hours. So it could show, like, there really were 4 flight directors that for each flight we covered it 24 hours a day through a flight. But anyway, Ed Harris played that role, and I thought he did a good job. When he says it's ready to go, let's go for flight, it is because of the dedication and training that the whole team has had. We spent thousands of hours in simulators in mission, sort of very close to mission mode, where one team called SimSoup prepared scenarios for every phase we might be doing entries or launches or lunar orbit or going down to land on the moon. And the purpose of this group was to take advantage of the simulators we had, which were pretty much replicas of the vehicle, same instrument panel, the systems worked like they normally would in the vehicle, but they also could impart failures. And for instance, the command module, the mothership, they had a choice menu of some 500 failures they could put in, system failures. And so this special team spent a lot of time, about 12 people in the SimSoup group, to devise for each of these simulations a set of failures that they chose to be imported at exactly the time they normally gave the script to the simulator controller operators to put them in. And their greatest glee was if they made us and mission control look bad. So almost every one of these sims were done that way. About 2 weeks before the flight, they only gave us some runs that were normal, let's say, no failures, so we could kind of get the real timeline flow of flying the flight. So there was nothing else before the crew that was preparing the mission control, and like I said, when Gene gave the go for launch, it was a totally dedicated, motivated crew. Nothing counted but the mission at hand. And as I said, they've been tested at home through thousands of hours of simulation. Now, Apollo 13 was a special case. Throughout the design of a vehicle, in fact, be an airplane or a spacecraft, part of the thing reliability engineering does is FEMA's, failure mean effects analysis. So they look at every system, every component, every valve, every wire, and if the wire breaks or shorted, or the valve fails open, fails closed, FEMA is written, and the effects are written in the report. And in the case of explosions, they were also failures, potentially. Most suspect was rocket engines, which in the earlier days they had worse history. It's pretty good today, but early on they had bad habit of blowing up. So that one and any explosion in general, that if you read the FEMA, it would say the vehicle and the crew will not survive. So we had an explosion of an oxygen tank, and the FEMA if you read it, would have said that. And we gave them all the problem because we were still there breathing. And now the problem was there was no set of books or procedures or anything thought out for most of these failures. That mission controllers had books behind them on their console they could go grab. Or we had checked the malfunction procedures on board. So there was nothing to deal with that situation. So a lot of it had to be ad-lib. In fact, in a PowerPoint I showed earlier, I had the timeline of sequence of what went on in that early time. And for the first 50 minutes, we were troubleshooting, trying to stop a leak that developed slowly, but developed in the only remaining oxygen tank. So that was what went on for 50 minutes before Jim Lovell and I abandoned the command module and went to the lunar module. So it was not a kind of event. A lot of people think of it as if we were going to run off the cliff in the car. It wasn't a heart and throat event. My initial emotion when I found out we lost one tank for sure was a sick feeling in my stomach. I knew we had lost the landing. And I trained through two previous backup assignments and was looking forward to landing on the moon, and that obviously was not going to, I knew that right away, it was not going to happen. But if you lose even one of the oxygen tanks, that's an abort. So without looking at mission rules, I knew that was true. So then we got in busy with this troubleshooting, and after about just an hour, Jim Lovell and I went to power up the other spacecraft. Because it was, fortunately, if you're going to have that kind of problem, we had it at a good time because we had not used the LIM yet to go land. If we had used the LIM and landed, none of us would be here. So we had a fully capable spacecraft that we could use to live off of, have communication, and those kinds of things. So that's what we got very busy, was to get that machine powered up and hoped it had not been damaged, which it had not. So we at least bought time. And that's what went on then for the next 4 days, was to settle one problem after another. And as I say, Mission Control did not have all the answers. They had to first develop an alternate plan. And Gene Kranz, I'll say, did the right thing. He strategically took himself out of Mission Control. He wasn't in there for the rest of most of those days. He formed a brain trust, and against that plan to get home, he established the open items, and then he assigned particular people to tackle those open items, and gave them, just called them in and said, here's what I want you to go figure out. You can use anybody in the country you want, but I want you back here. And they gave them a timeline to be back with the answer. In some cases need to be tried out in a simulator. In the case of the lithium cartridge fix you saw in the movie, they actually tested that in a chamber. We had an environmental system in the chamber in Building 7 in Houston. They tested that first there before they passed that procedure up to it. So that's the way that was done. The process was normally a little more bureaucratic. When you had a problem, Mission Control didn't have an answer, they handed it to the MIR, the Mission Evaluation Room, which had a sea of engineers and probe people that then could call anywhere in the country to the major prime contractors or subcontractors, pull more brain trust into working the problem. But he knew that would take too much time. That's why he picked one person he felt was most capable of running with it. He said, you go. They personally had to go get the right people gathered to work the problem. The MIR was an interesting room, though. Like I said, we had that capability of most problems handled through it. It double doors and a big sign over the MIR that said, God is welcome, all others bring data. Anyway, MIR was cut out in this case. Anyway, now I'd like to run the video, if I can get the Wizard of Oz back there to crank it up and show you some of the real stuff. It won't be Dolby sound and Hollywood quality. But now I'll try to narrate this to get over where it's not blocking your view. Okay, it's called a quick look. The first part is actually 13 minutes, not by plan, by accident. Saturn V here that we flew, it's a big rocket. If anybody's been to Kennedy or Marshall or Johnson, you've seen one laying on the side. It's 363 feet. So if you lay it on the side, it covers a football field plus both end zones plus 3 feet. 3 stages, a little lunar module, which is a delicate machine, hidden under slaw panels, protected from aerodynamics because it's not meant to fly in the air, and the capsule right up on the tippy top. We suited up in this building called the O&C building, Operations and Checkout. Ryan Capsule recently went through tests in this facility before he got shipped to Plumbrook facility in Ohio for back thermal testing. We climbed aboard that converted milk wagon NASA had painted up nicely. Rode benches out, had an intercom we could hook up and talk to suit techs. The day you get to the launch pad for the launch, it's different. Most times you go, and I've been out there testing the spacecraft before flying it, and it's normally a whole host of people up and down that stack working. The day you go out, there's no one there. You just have the 4 people waiting at the top and the 2 suit techs with you. And they succeed in getting you all strapped in and buttoned in, and they close the hatch, do a leak check, and they leave. This is one of the firing rooms at Kennedy. There are several of these. There's not number consoles because there's different ones monitoring each of the 3 stages of the rocket. The instrument unit, which is the 3rd stage that controls the rocket. And then, of course, the LEM and the capsule command and service module on top. Those same rooms, incidentally, was the same rooms to launch shuttles, 135 times. Different, more modern consoles and electronics and newer people in many cases. This is the liftoff. 5 F1 engines, they each produce 1.5 million pounds of thrust. But it doesn't move off real swift. It's not exactly slow motion, but it's slow. But it's building G's as it's going up because it's burning tons of liquid ox and RP1, kerosene actually, was propellant on this first stage. It's getting lighter with the same amount of push. So the most unusual thing for me, I've been 2 Marine fighter squadrons on my way up and done a lot of different exotic maneuvering in airplanes. The most unusual thing of the ride was its herky-jerky, I'd call it. It's not a good English word, I guess. When the engine's gimbaled and the 4 outer engines moved to steer the rocket, that was exaggerated because you're way up on that top. And so it'd be like being on the top of a broomstick. Somebody shakes the bottom, then it really, you felt it. An unusual motion compared to an airplane. We went around in Earth orbit about 2 times, very low altitude, about 110 miles. And this shows us now having left the Earth. The 3rd stage was reignited by people on the ground, the S4B, and that got us to 25,000 miles an hour to leave the Earth, to leave Earth orbit, which is roughly 18,000 miles an hour. And we're headed out to the moon. Now Jack Schweigert, who replaced Kim Mattingly 2.5 days before launch, is flying a machine, and he's trying to put a probe in that dark black circle you see in the upper right of the screen. That's the upper hatch of the landing craft. And when he inserts the probe in that hole, his latches can be fired to pull the 2 vehicles tightly together to get an airtight seal. And then you can open hatches on either side and have a tunnel to go between the two spacecraft. And you'll see a picture of that later. He's sighting on that thing just about disappearing there in the center, because when you get real close, you lose what you're trying to dock with in your window. So you have to use that offset target. Same thing they did with shuttle and space station through all of its flights. That's the 3rd stage sitting off to the side. This was the first flight where it was redirected by venting. They used venting, again, people on the ground, with it pointing in a certain direction, and deliberately made it impact the moon. We had placed seismometers on every landed mission, and there had been 2 by this time, 11 and 12. And by hitting the moon, it was in effect creating a minor meteorite impact. So you get reverberations to look at substrata on the moon with those seismometers. Same thing is done here on Earth to search for oil and gas, whether it's a shock like that, or sonic shock when a boat's traveling in the ocean. So look for that. Now this is after we had the explosion, and it's pretty dark because we never had lights on again. We had to save power, so we used flashlights if we had to read or write. And the only time we shoot pictures, which I'm shooting here, is when it had sunlight coming in the window to allow you to give enough light to shoot pictures. And I'm taking a trip down through that tunnel now, from the command module, the mothership, down into the limb here in Papanak Bottom, playing around with I think a camera cover here. And zero G was the other very unusual thing about space flight. Of course, you can have short periods of that in an airplane, like 20, 30 seconds. But you can't have it continuous like you can in space. So floating yourself or objects, kind of euphoric. It did make our little vehicle seem a little bigger, too, because you could use the whole volume. These are the people now in mission control that maybe you saw earlier pictures where they look pretty relaxed watching a TV show. Here you see a lot of furrowed eyebrows. Pressure was on. They ran simulators 24 hours a day, both at Kennedy and Johnson, where people were trying some of the new procedures out on the ground, proved them. Jim Lovell over there, you see his commander's rubbing his hands. It had gotten very cold because we powered the limb down to about 12.5 amps on a 30-volt DC system. So that's about equivalent power on your sofa at home if you have lamps on either end of the sofa and you put up to the third click on the light bulb. That's how much power we're using. The spacecraft was not meant to operate at that low of power. So it got very cold and damp, actually. The water separator didn't operate well, so water was collecting everywhere. Now this is the scene showing Deep Slate in mission control holding the canister that they rigged on the ground. And they, as I said, they tested it in a vacuum chamber in Building 7 at Johnson. Confirmed that it worked okay before they passed that procedure up. Actually, Jack and Jim did it. The movie had me ripping cellophane. I was off duty. I was asleep when they were Jim and Jack. So I wasn't involved. But it worked. It worked great. Now this is the moon as we went by it. The back side of the moon is quite different from the front side. It's much more rugged, not as many dark areas on the back side. And again, this is poor film, not just from the vintage it is. Oh, here's one of the first space selfies. I had the cameras running and I just set it out there and let it keep running in midair and shoot my picture. That's Jack Swigert asleep in the back of the landing craft. Now Jack was a command module pilot, and he spent all his time working on that vehicle and testing at the plant and at Kennedy and all his simulator training. He was the first time he was ever in a lunar module was in flight, when he joined us down in the limb. He had never been in one before in his life. We did a burn passing the moon. It cut off 10 hours. It helped us out with consumables. Here, I point this out to the school children. You see the ruler and graph paper, and plotting data manually. Computers power wasn't that great then. A big computer on board the spacecraft was 1/10 of a megabyte memory. 1/10 of a megabyte. Mission control had 5 rows of IBM 36075s, these 5-foot cabinets with whirring disk. That gave them 5 megabytes at all of mission control. Chow time, we gave up on freeze dry. I did anyway. I think Jack's there spooning out like a thick beef stew, probably about 45 degrees temperature. Jim had some frankfurters. I lived pretty much out of a separate door in the pantry area, and it had snacks. So I lived mostly off peanuts bread cubes and cookie cubes, about that big bite size. So that was my diet for most of that 4 days. This shows us coming back through entry. Another miracle, we had obviously abused the systems in the mothership. We shut it down, froze it literally. The water tanks froze. They were still found frozen when they recovered it on board the aircraft carrier. So we had violated specifications on almost all the avionics equipment, and yet it came to life and gave us the second most accurate splashdown in the program. Only Apollo 10 did better. We were covered by the Iwo Jima aircraft carrier. It was actually had been on combat duty in Vietnam, and they rerouted it south to pick us up. They were on their way back to San Diego, so they came by and retrieved us. In the South Pacific, we were not too far south of the Samoan Islands. The next day, we left the carrier, helicoptered to Samoa, hopped on an Air Force C-141 and went to Hawaii to meet President Nixon. We came out with our wives in Air Force One to join us at Hawaii. This is the helicopter brought us on board, number 66, which incidentally crashed at sea later. They have a helicopter like that on the Midway at San Diego, which is a museum in San Diego, a replica. And I'm a little stiff-legged. I had a urinary tract infection I picked up, so I had to go to sick bay. I went to sick bay, and the rest of the crew went to a party on the hangar. And this is people in mission control celebrating, well-deserved. They did not have a splashdown party. Normally, after flights at each of the centers, they normally have a splashdown party, and they don't do that till the crew is safely returned. So the crew but never gets to go to one. In our case, they were so tired, they delayed the splashdown party. They just went home to get some rest, and they had it 2 weeks later. So we got to go to a splashdown party, which the normal crews didn't get to do. I went off and after I trained for another mission, Apollo 16.